amazing.
Ooh.
Awesome. That looked
It was
incredible.
so good.
Yeah.
Oh, we're live. And we're talking
We did
about
it.
food.
Just in time for shrimp burgers.
So I just had my first steamed crabs of the season, and I was pretty pumped about that. So
That sounds amazing. I've been eating nothing but seafood almost every day since we got here.
So
It's
good.
terrible.
summertime, man, that's where it's at.
It's a lean
Take advantage.
protein.
It's just all the beer that you consume while you do it that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been trying to, get out and bike every day too, because I know I'm gonna have to make up for it, the older I get.
All right. Speaking of beers. We're giving people a minute or so to collect themselves for
I appreciate everybody giving us just a second, making sure that we are shared out to the Mosby Heritage Area Association page, making sure we're on the Loudoun Museum page, and we'll roll into the really cool stuff here in just a sec.
Rich, you share out to Civil War Pittsburgh, man.
I'm doing it right now.
Okay. Ooh, that is a really tasty beer.
I was telling them before you jumped on, I went to Gettysburg after work last night, and like for June in Gettysburg, you would think it was packed. It was weirdly quiet.
I've been hearing that from a couple different people. Yeah. Let me see here.
Yeah, it felt like it was like the crowd was like dead of winter.
Yeah.
Knocking for mid-June.
Now, is everything kind of closed down in Gettysburg right now, or how's it looking up there?
I mean, I didn't get there until the evening, so I went after work. So I mean, the visitor center would have been closed anyways, but the visitor center's not open yet. Some of the restaurants downtown, everything seemed to be, but for the battlefield, there were no restrictions on where you could walk outside at least.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, we saw some of the Rangers from Gettysburg today. We did a video with them, and they said they're opening next week? Is that what they said? The visitor center?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
with like safety precautions in place, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. In the meantime, if folks are looking for good battlefields to tour, there are plenty. There's a good chance there is a battlefield or historic area within 10, 15 miles of wherever you are. So explore.
Right.
That's my official pitch. That's it. That's all I had to do tonight.
We need like the more you know music to play.
But I think we can go ahead and get started. We've got the go ahead from Andrea. Great. So thanks again for joining us. We took a brief break last week, but we are back better than ever for History on Tap. This week's topic is 1864. What is it good for? Tonight, per usual, I am joined by my colleague Travis Shaw with the Mosby Heritage Area Association and Joe Rizzo from the Loudoun Museum. My name is Anne-Marie Paquette, and this week our special guest is Rich Condon, who is joining us from Civil War Pittsburgh, but he's actually joining us from South Carolina. So I don't know exactly how the geography works out. But we'll go around and say briefly what we're going to talk about tonight and also what we're drinking. Joe, would you kick us off?
Sure. I am drinking from Crooked Run Waterfall, one of their new sour beers out. Really good flavor to it. And I'm going to talk about three awesome ladies from Waterford, Virginia, who defy the Confederacy a bit, and they start their own newspaper.
Very cool. Travis, what's on your plate?
So I am drinking Table Talk by Old Busthead in Fauquier County. It's a Belgian style wit, my favorite style of beer, and I'm really enjoying it. And I will be talking about one of the weirder 4th of July celebrations to have ever occurred in this area. It's a strange story, so I think you'll like it.
Very cool. Rich, why don't you tell us about what you're talking about and if you're drinking something special?
I am actually drinking Gullah Cream Ale. This is from Revelry Brewing in Charleston, South Carolina, just a little bit north of where I am right now. And it's really good. This actually, what drew me to it was a portion of the proceeds from this beer go toward Gullah Geechee historical preservation in the Low Country. I'll actually be talking about something that has nothing to do with Civil War Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania in general. I'm going to be covering the debacle at Spring Hill, Tennessee, in November of 1864 during Hood's Middle Tennessee campaign.
Awesome. I'm drinking Hardway by Old Ox. And I will be talking about Henry Willis, who tries to unite his family in the midst of the Civil War. It'll be a really interesting story. So I think we're going to roll right in, and I believe Joe's going to take it away.
Do you want me to go first or Travis go first? Or
Ooh, I forget what we had decided. Did we decide Travis first?
no big deal. I can take it. I'll steal it from Travis.
Okay.
Steal it.
You can have it. I'll pass.
Steal it the way one might steal a cake.
Ooh, don't give too much away.
It's not a piece of cake with the three ladies I'm going to talk about.
Heyo. All right, I'm getting the notification that we are back online. Thanks, folks, for bearing with us. We went ahead and just refreshed our connection. Hopefully this will relieve some of the choppiness that we were seeing before.
And we'll get it reposted back to the Loudoun Museum, the Mosby page, Civil War Pittsburgh, and we'll be back up and we'll jump right back into it.
That's right. In the meantime, while I get that posted, we are on Historians on Tap right now.
Travis, why don't we do a quick rundown what we're drinking? Travis,
Yeah, we'll do a quick
Yeah, sounds
rundown.
good.
For those of you who missed it when the connection was bad, I will be drinking Table Talk from Old Busthead Brewing in Fauquier County. Fantastic Belgian-style wit. And I will be talking about an unusual 4th of July celebration that occurs in 1864. Rich, our special guest for the night from Civil War Pittsburgh, what are you drinking and what will you be talking about tonight?
I'm drinking Gullah Cream Ale from Revelry Brewing in Charleston, South Carolina, a nod to the Gullah Geechee people of the Low Country. And I'm actually going to be talking about nothing to do with Pittsburgh, actually the Middle Tennessee campaign of 1864 and John Bell Hood's giant blunder at Spring Hill.
Great. Joe, how about you?
Yeah, and I'm drinking Waterfall by Crooked Run, and I'm talking about three young ladies from Waterford, Virginia, who started their own newspaper during 1864.
Great. And Anne Marie, we're getting there, right?
We're back up on the pages that we wanted to be on. Hopefully you guys are all receiving us loud and clear this time. If not, just please bear with us and we'll soldier on through. You will be able to watch the video after the program as well if catching it live is not, is kind of bumpy. I'm drinking Hardway Summer Lager from Old Ox Brewery, and I will be talking about Henry Willis, who was a free Black Virginian who was just trying to reunite his family during the fateful fall of 1864.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started and jump right into it to cut off some time. Again, I want to talk about some issues in 1864, particularly with civilians, as with the Overland Campaign that usually gets the attention in May and early June 1864. But like in all the years, civilians are dealing with the war constantly. It's not just during campaigns. It's not just when armies are around. And some of the changes going on in 1864 include at the high command. And when Ulysses S. Grant takes command, he makes some staff changes and some policy ones. And one of the things he does in Virginia is he replaces a man named Franz Sigel, who has a pretty terrible military record, replaces him as the head of the Department of West Virginia. Sigel lived up to that bad reputation at the defeat at Newmarket in mid-May, and he is replaced by David Hunter. And David Hunter goes about implementing a much harder war policy that will then impact civilians, including all civilians, whether they're pro-secession or not. And that brings Waterford and Loudoun into focus, because what this May directive states by David Hunter is that it prohibits any citizen, male or female, from crossing the lines of either direction. And by lines, I'm talking about the Potomac River. And what this meant was that it's particularly difficult for those who are near the Potomac, if they have family ties across the river, economic ties, lines of information, all of that gets cut with a more strict policy of using that as a border. And for Waterford, Virginia, it's a Quaker community. It's a more pro-union community. And what that meant was that a lot of the males of Waterford had fled by 1864. Some of them had gone to Point of Rocks, Maryland, just on the other side of the Potomac to avoid conscription. Others had joined Union units fighting for the Union Army. So it meant there's a lot of females in town. And one of those females in particular was named Lizzie Dutton. And she was from a very pro-union family, the Duttons. Another family that I'll bring up are the Steer family, also very well known for their union sentiment from Waterford, Virginia. And before this kind of increased directive went into place, in April 1864, Lizzie Dutton went to Baltimore to take part in the Baltimore Sanitary Fair. And when she was there, she almost became a celebrity of sorts because a lot of the politicians and Northerners that were at the Sanitary Fair were surprised to hear about the Union sentiment in Northern Virginia. And so they were fascinated by how she even got there, what it was like in Virginia as a pro-Union person. So that may be where this idea came into her mind for about what she's going to do. But when she returns back to Waterford, again, it's a tough situation for pro-Union sentiment because people like the Mosby Rangers and other units are regularly around, and they target pro-Union people, with houses being gone through, supplies being taken. So with that in mind, Lizzie Dutton, her younger sister Lida, and another Waterford lady, Sarah Steele, come up with the idea of writing a pro-Union newspaper that would tell the story of what it's like in a place like Waterford, Virginia, and let people outside of that kind of blockade area see what life is like under Confederate occupation. And they run this idea by John Dutton, again, a very pro-Union father of Lida and Lizzie. He was currently serving with the federal government in Point of Rocks. And Lizzie actually sneaks across, I should say, the Potomac River to talk to John about the idea. He must have been in favor of it. And he even says that if they can write this newspaper, he will get it to an editor of the Baltimore American in Baltimore to get it published. So Lizzie sneaks back across the Potomac River, and the three ladies go about doing this pro-Union paper. What's so fascinating about this paper is that this is a very, again, pro-Union, unabashedly pro-Union, pro-Abraham Lincoln newspaper. And they don't hide their sentiments when they're working on this first edition. And the goals of this seem pretty straightforward. For one, they want this kind of blockade of sorts to be lifted, because that's one of the problems bringing them a lot of troubles in Waterford. They want to raise money, and what they'll ultimately end up doing is selling the newspaper for 10 cents, and all the proceeds are going to go to the U.S. Sanitary Commission. And they also probably want to raise the idea of maybe bringing federal troops to Waterford to help out to protect them from Mosby Rangers, among others. And one thing that's so fascinating is this takes a lot of courage, what these three ladies do. Again, most of the men are away from Waterford. They're young ladies in a dangerous situation, and they don't hide who they are when they start working on this paper. They have their first names directly on the first edition of the Waterford News. They have just under the masthead in big letters, Union Forever. And they vocally advocate for Abraham Lincoln's election for the fall of 1864. And they realize who their audience is as well when they're writing this newspaper. And they are appealing to Union soldiers who they figure are going to be their primary audience, especially those along the border. So they have a mix between serious conversations, reports of what it's like in occupied Waterford, but then they also have some moments of levity. And I'll give some examples of that. But after they wrote the first article, or I should say the first edition, they had to actually get it published. So that meant Lida, who's only 19 years old at the time, snuck across the Potomac River in order to get this to her father to then get into Baltimore. Apparently Union soldiers saw her try to wade across the Potomac, told her to go back, but she didn't listen. Supposedly got her back across. The Union soldiers took the instructions and the first edition, got it to John Dutton, and then Dutton got it to the editor in Baltimore, and they got it published. And it became an instant success. Just to financially show you the success it came, again, they sold it for 10 cents an issue. They raised $1,000 for the U.S. Sanitary Commission off the proceeds of the eventually will become 8 editions of the Waterford News. And after that first one, and what they say in terms of what the purpose of this is, quote, "We wish and expect it to meet the condemnation of our enemies, for they are averse to the truth, and that this sheet will contain." So they want to speak out against what they saw as Confederate propaganda, falsehoods about the war, falsehoods about sentiments in Virginia.
Fake news.
Yeah, and they directly confront these issues head on. And this gets widespread attention. It's not just the Union soldiers along the Potomac that end up reading this. People send it to Abraham Lincoln. and it gets within Lincoln's documents. Supposedly Jefferson Davis also got wind of what was going on and was furious when he heard about this kind of underground pro-union newspaper that was being smuggled out. And for 8 different times, they wrote this throughout the rest of 1864 and early 1865, smuggled it across the Potomac and got it published in Baltimore. After the war, I'll talk about some of the things they particularly say, but after the war, this kind of gets forgotten about in Waterford. The Dutton ladies both marry. One moves to Indiana, one moves to New York City. Sarah Steele, the third, writes, or stays in Waterford. And it really isn't really seen and really remembered anyway. And part of that's probably because in the post-war years, a lot of ex-Confederates take on positions of power back in Virginia. But in 1922, the letters and diary of one of the Dutton ladies was found by her daughter, which then spoke about the Waterford News, and that daughter then published something in a Baltimore paper about it. And then it's not until the 1950s, really, that some more of the editions are discovered by a historian who actually found it in Abraham Lincoln's papers at the Library of Congress. And it wasn't even until 1998 that the 8th issue of the Waterford News was discovered. So this isn't something that was known all the time. A lot of it's still some pretty recent discoveries about what those 3 ladies wrote about. But I figured I'd give you some examples that explain some of the issues and some of the exact writings of it. And I will say a big thank you to the Waterford Foundation, who helped restore these and publish these. Yeah, big thank you to the Waterford Foundation. They actually have it in a booklet form if you want to read all the issues of the Waterford News. They sell it, and we sell it also at the Loudoun Museum. And a plug, we are reopening next weekend, so pop in and get a copy of all 8 issues.
But the Thomas Balch Library, I believe, also has copies.
Awesome, yeah. And it's worth reading. I mean, it's really interesting stuff to read. They're very witty, they're very intelligent in what they're writing about.
Great sense of humor is really the thing that stands out to me. They're funny.
They're sassy.
Yeah. They're writing about serious issues. Like, they make a really great case for why Union soldiers should have absentee voting, so the soldier's voice can get heard. One of the issues covers that. They do mock the Southern press often, which is pretty funny, claiming how they're biased. They make fun of Jubal Early for his failed raid in 1864 and what happens in the Shenandoah Valley. And they comment frequently about Grant besting Robert E. Lee. But again, they're also hurting from Union policies too, where Union policies are not differentiating between pockets of Unionists and secessionists. All Virginians feel the hard hand of war that's being brought down by Union policies, and they're feeling that as well in Waterford. But just to give you a couple examples of things that they write. In the what's called Pop Gun section of one of the early issues, they write, "The young ladies of Waterford are hereby notified to meet the first opportunity and lend their mutual aid in filling a large mud hole with stone. Said mud hole being located in the middle of 2nd Street, and the men have driven around it so much that it extended each side. Being fearful the gentlemen will get their feet muddy, the ladies will try to remedy it." That mud hole is brought up multiple times in other
issues. There's a whole saga.
Yep.
They also have a section that covers local marriages during 1864. And of course, as I mentioned, most of the men aren't in Waterford, so there are no engagements or really marriages for the most part happening. In the marriage section, they get a different kind of comedic things. And one of them, they said, "We think there is no prospect of having this long continued vacancy filled until after the war. So we will discontinue for the present." In the next edition in the marriage section, they write, "After the marriage section was closed, the young gentlemen became very patriotic, volunteering to serve a lifetime, and proposals numerous flocked in. We will make them feel that delays are dangerous." And then again, they've got some jokes that are littered in, again, through serious conversations and enlightening writings that they do. They've got some good jokes. And probably my favorite joke out of the 8 editions made a joke that also included the marriage column. And they asked, "Why are the rebel ranks like our marriage column?" And their answer was, "Because there is little probability of their ever being filled."
Oh, burn.
Boom.
Isn't there one where it's like, what kind of hoods does the Southern press love? False hoods is like.
Yeah, what hood is most fashionable in the South?
Yeah,
That
that's
was
one of them
good.
too. Yeah, there's a lot of really witty comments that they put kind of snuck in throughout all 8
Yeah.
editions.
Yeah, one of my favorites is they're talking about the blockade and how like the stores are empty and the shelves are empty. They can't get the things they want. And they're like, wanted something along the lines of like stores full of, clothing and whatever, and like handsome young clerks to staff them.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah, and when they always give like the Southern press like blurb, they always say lie and emphasize liable. Too,
Yes.
again, because they claim that what Southern newspapers are saying aren't accurate. And I will say though, again, like, they have a lot of funny parts throughout this, but this is not just satire. They are really trying to show the tough condition that they're in. Again, they're suffering from union policies. They're pro-union people, and they're in a location where being pro-union, the Confederacy clearly has issues. And Mosby's Rangers do target Sunnyside, the Dutton home. Sarah Steer's father, in June 1864, does get taken prisoner, probably by Mosby's men, and is sent to Castle Thunder for a time period in 1864. So again, it's very serious, the conditions in Northern Virginia 1864. But what they do is manage to also bring some lighthearted moments to that serious information.
Yeah. That's a great story.
you gotta laugh to keep from crying sometimes.
Right. And on that, I'll definitely cheer Lizzie, Lida, and Sarah for what they did.
Cheers, the Waterford News.
Various things that they write, enlightening things too.
Yeah, it's a great read. And to think that it's like teenage girls that are writing this is what really kind of puts it in my head. It's hilarious.
24, 19, and 26 are the ages of the three. I mean, it's crazy, and again, the courage that it takes to do so, knowing you're going to be targeted and you're going to try to have to, they're not hiding who they are, and they're going to be targeted by Confederates, try to intimidate them, but they didn't back down.
Yeah, I know their house gets searched multiple times.
I think.
Yeah.
Tell us a summer story, Travis.
Yeah, I've got a lighthearted story, and it's perfect because we're coming up on the 4th of July. So we're going to talk about an event that occurred on the 4th of July, 1864. In the summer of 1864, one of the major military movements that occurs is Jubal Early's invasion of the North. This is kind of the third big Confederate invasion of the North. On the big picture, Robert E. Lee and his army are kind of pinned down outside of Petersburg, and he sends Jubal Early northward with a force to kind of draw Union troops away from Petersburg, give him a little bit of breathing room. And so early June, these guys are crossing the Potomac River into Maryland. The idea is, maybe they'll threaten Baltimore, maybe they'll threaten Washington, draw troops away from Petersburg, heck, maybe even capture Washington, do something to really hurt Lincoln's chances at re-election, and really give the Northerners a scare. And so as part of this movement, John Mosby and his partisan battalion are going to undertake a raid in order to just kind of create chaos and confusion in the Union lines, and really, again, kind of draw the attention away from Early's movements across the river. And the target that they pick is going to be a small town on the Potomac River called Point of Rocks. Joe mentioned it earlier. It's right across the river, north of Leesburg in southern Frederick County. Not much to Point of Rocks, either in 1864 or today, but it is a strategic location. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad run through the town. The C&O Canal runs right through the town. By 1864, it's become a place of refuge for a lot of Virginia Unionists, like the Duttons. So it's going to be a pretty inviting target. And so Mosby is going to plan a quick strike on this town in order to just kind of create chaos. Really nothing more. So on July 4th, his troops will come splashing across the Potomac River. He's got about 250 men. Along with the cannon. This is one of the first engagements where Mosby will actually have an artillery piece with him as well. So he leaves the cannon on a high, prominent on the Virginia side to kind of cover his advance. And they're going to splash across the river just west of Point of Rocks. The first people that they encounter are a bunch of Treasury Department workers on a picnic cruise. Anne Marie, a few weeks ago, told this story. These guys are on a boat called the Flying Cloud, and Mosby's men will start firing down on the flying cloud. The Treasury Department guys will scatter. One of them actually gets killed, Elijah Hobart. Poor Elijah Hobart, as we heard several weeks ago.
Feels like
could not catch a break. So he's actually killed in this brief exchange on the canal. And, as Mosby's men board the canal boat, they find liquor, they find cigars, they find food, all the good stuff that these guys had packed for their picnic. Yeah, probably a few nice brews. Then they set off east down the canal towpath towards the actual town of Point of Rocks. And at this point, Point of Rocks is garrisoned by a small group of Union troops. The forces are about equal. But the Union garrison is made up of the Loudoun Rangers, which we've mentioned a few times in previous programs. So these are cavalrymen from Virginia serving in the Union Army. To put it mildly, the Loudoun Rangers do not have the best combat record, specifically when they're up against Mosby's men. There's also a few companies of infantry, guys from the Potomac Home Brigade. Now, these are veterans of Gettysburg. They've seen some action. And they're going to put up a little bit of a fight as Mosby's men come kind of thundering down the towpath towards them. It's not much of a fight because the Loudoun Rangers will hightail it up towards Frederick and safety, leaving the infantry there kind of exposed. The Home Brigade guys pull out of town in fairly good order, but they leave the town of Point of Rocks completely open to Mosby and his men. And they're going to set about doing exactly what they planned on doing, and that's creating chaos. They're going to cut telegraph lines. Very important, because Early and his men are moving on Harper's Ferry. So if you can cut the telegraph line between Harper's Ferry and DC, Union High Command in Washington has no idea what's going on. They're going to try to destroy a train. Actually, a train is coming east from Sandy Hook from the direction of Harper's Ferry. They lob some artillery shells at it. The train escapes fairly unharmed. They're going to destroy some canal boats. There's some boats on the canal filled with grain and things like that. They'll be torched. But Mosby's men really end up having a field day in the town. First of all, they're going to rob the post office, because of course that's a government facility. They're going to take all the money there. And then they're going to turn their attention to private property. There's a number of stores, 4 or 5 stores in town. They are going to go absolutely buck wild looting these places. They steal everything that is not nailed down, and they destroy whatever they can't carry off. So you read descriptions of these guys. They start taking liquor, they start taking food, they start taking clothing, and then they start getting into all the stuff that really isn't useful to a soldier necessarily. They start taking things like fabric. This raid will go down in history as the Calico Raid, or the Great Calico Raid, because they steal so much fabric. They steal hoops for ladies' dresses. They steal hats and boots and bonnets. Like I said, literally anything that's not nailed down. They torch a warehouse. There's a warehouse full of grain there that belongs to, he's a Virginian who has come to the Maryland side of the river, so they torch that. There's accounts of them taking candy, literally anything they can get their hands on. There's a cool account from one of Mosby's men, says, the men resumed their march bedecked in a very grotesque and original manner with their captured goods. As they passed along the road, some arrayed in crinoline, some wearing bonnets, and all disguised with some incongruous and fantastic article of apparel. They looked like a company of masqueraders. So, I love this image of these rough and tumble Confederate cavalrymen, with bonnets and hoops and calico fabric draped all over their horses, ribbons on their horses. They really had a field day. But the weirdest thing that they find when they loot Point of Rocks, Maryland, is the Eagle Cake. And this is one of my favorite Civil War stories. So it's the 4th of July, and the patriotic ladies of Point of Rocks had spent the previous 3 days baking a cake to celebrate the nation's birthday. This was a cake in the shape of a spread eagle that measured 25 feet from beak to tail. It took them 3 days to bake this thing. And the descriptions of it are absolutely, they had sent away to Boston for the molds to make this thing. It's taken them 3 days, like day and night, baking the pieces to piece it together. It has glass eyes. It has glass talons. And the most remarkable thing in my mind is that it has some sort of device baked inside or hidden inside the cake so that whenever you cut a slice of it, it would screech like an eagle. And I'm still trying to figure out, like 150 odd years later, how that works. So these Confederate troops find this cake. And this cake that was supposed to be, the Union garrison were going to share to celebrate the 4th of July. They find it, and they seem like absolutely dumbstruck by this thing. And they decide that it should be taken back to Virginia as a trophy of war. And the idea was actually that they would take it to Richmond and like, I guess, present it to Jefferson Davis or something like that. So the first obstacle is like, how do we move this 25-foot eagle cake back to Virginia? They burned all the canal boats, so there are no canal boats.
Also, hungry soldiers all around.
Yeah, and like, you gotta imagine, like, these guys are in bonnets and ribbons, and they're like half drunk on everything they've looted out of the stores. They're trying to figure out how to get this cake across the river. So they build a raft, they float it across the Potomac, and once they get it onto the southern shore, they requisition a wagon from a local Unionist farmer. They take his ox cart, they load this thing onto the wagon, and they head south towards Leesburg. That night, the owner of this cart, this Unionist farmer, calls together some local African-American, slaves that he knows, enslaved people that he knows. And together, while the Rangers are kind of sleeping off their drunken stupor, they sneak the eagle cake out of the Confederate camp, and they hide it somewhere in a cave along Goose Creek, just south of Leesburg. He writes about how he secreted his load in one of the caves that he had known along the banks of Goose Creek. So you've got, the next day, July 5th, these hungover raiders wake up and they cannot find the eagle cake. And they actually go to the guy's house, but like, he had snuck back home and like gone to bed and played it off totally innocent. No idea what happened to the cake. This is not the end of the eagle cake. This same Unionist farmer, weeks later, after Jubal Early has been repulsed at the gates of Washington, he's re-entered Loudoun County, he's being chased across Loudoun County by the Union Army. He goes to General Wright, who's commanding the Union Corps in Loudoun County, and he says, hey, I know where they hid this eagle cake. You guys should get it back. So Union forces recover the eagle cake like 3 weeks later.
Gross.
God only knows what that cake looked like after being stuck in a cave for 3 weeks, but it must have been awful. The Union forces load it onto a wagon, and they bring it with them as they pursue Early's army across Loudoun County, across the Blue Ridge Mountains, and into the Shenandoah Valley. And while trying to float the eagle cake across the Shenandoah River, the raft that it is on overturns. The cake is lost to the Shenandoah River. But it's this really amazing back and forth for a few weeks of like, who's going to keep the eagle cake, and like why they brought it with them to the Shenandoah, like who knows. But it certainly was a memorable 4th of July for the people of Point of Rocks and for Mosby's Rangers, and for anyone caught up in the saga of the great eagle cake of '64. So yeah,
I will drink to that, to the eagle cake.
So now we're totally going to bake an eagle cake for the 4th of July, right?
I think so.
What I heard is that parts of it are still in the Shenandoah. So we're going to have to.
Yeah, it was probably like rock hard after 3 weeks of sitting in a cave. So
It reminds me of a Simpsons episode where Homer's like chasing down a flying pig. He's like, it's still
Just
good.
a little wet. It's still good. It's still good.
It's so good.
Yeah, there's a great eyewitness account from when it goes in the Shenandoah. It says, I was told it was beyond description. Suffice to say, the greatest confusion prevailed. Everyone wanted his own plan adopted to save the bird. And before anyone that the men suggested could be adopted, to their utmost dismay and horror, the bird gave one shriek and then sunk to rise no more.
Hashtag save the bird.
Save the bird.
Travis, on Facebook, Heather asked about the location of the caves around Goose Creek. Do we know, or your thoughts over there?
We do not know where the eagle cake was hidden.
There could be cakes anywhere out there on Goose Creek. You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, we might have to take like a kayak trip down Goose Creek to see if we can figure it out. It was somewhere in the vicinity of Leesburg, but that's all we really know.
There's also so many weird things that people like float in on different rivers around here. I mean, we've talked, some of these stories have covered like weird makeshift boats. We just have to have a day of like trying these all out. Like we got people just like walking through the river. We got like weird little boats.
It can be a regatta
On
theme.
the river, like canal disasters.
One guy rode across in a coffin,
Oh yeah, that was
dealing with a picket. Yeah.
Now, not to like harsh everybody's good times, but the Calico raid was not all fun and games. We mentioned Elijah Hobart, who was this Treasury Department guy. He was killed. There was also a civilian casualty that occurred. An 18-year-old young lady, Hester Fisher, was actually struck and killed by a stray round while standing on the porch of her house in Point of Rocks, which, to kind of tie back to something that Joe talked about, in 1861, at the beginning of the war, Point of Rocks is seen as a secessionist town. A lot of the people there are Southern sympathizers. By 1864, the local opinion really begins to turn, because this is not the first time they've been raided by Confederates. And especially the death of Hester Fisher really turns the local populace against Mosby's Rangers in particular, but against kind of, Confederate soldiers who are raiding back and forth, because, here's, a completely innocent young lady just killed on the front porch of her home, accidentally, of course, but, a casualty of the Calico raid. But, it's interesting that I guess you could call Hobart a civilian at this point too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so 2 civilians are the only deaths that occur during this raid. There's a handful of guys wounded, but
and
one
not all
eagle
fun
cake.
and
Games, but the eagle cake is pretty cool. So
Yeah, and you mentioned those stores being raided, like the Dutton's family store. I think that the dry goods store is raided and ransacked from the Calico raid, and that was then just a few days after Sarah Steer's father was taken captive and sent down to Castle Thunder, the prison in Richmond.
Yeah.
Do they write about the raid in the Waterford News?
They had to have, because the first edition is in late May. So this is June, the Calico raid. So I'll have to go back and look at the second edition to see if it gets mentioned specifically. They do mention it in one of the editions that Sarah's father is returned. So you do see that kind of come back. I'd have to go back and look at the second issue to see if they mentioned it. Or maybe in the third issue at that point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stores they raid is owned by Lewis Means, who is brother to Sam Means, who commands the Loudoun Rangers. But Lewis is, despite his brother being a Unionist, he's a hardcore secessionist, and like even his store is looted and robbed. Now, when Mosby's guys get back to Virginia, they are incredibly popular, especially with the young ladies in Fauquier County who have not seen calico fabric and silk ribbons and new boots and new bonnets in months, if not years, because of that blockade. So, there's all these accounts of like Mosby's guys offering up bonnets and ribbons in exchange for kisses from the young ladies.
Yikes.
Imagine if they brought a eagle cake, what they would have gotten.
I know, right? It's a shame.
But what's the going rate for eagle cake and like romantic
What's the kiss
interludes?
exchange rate for an eagle cake?
Wow, that's a tough transition to Tennessee.
Yeah, let's
let's take things
I
west.
want
for a
to.
moment.
I want to say you took the cake with that one, Travis.
Oh, ouch.
Puns roll on.
Also, it's 2020 now, and why can't we have a 25-foot screaming eagle cake now?
I mean, who's stopping us?
My birthday's in a few months, so I kind of want that.
All right,
That's
we'll prep.
my birthday now.
If we can't do it by the 4th of July, and we'll get to work and put our
We'll do it.
energies to it,
So-
we'll do it for your birthday.
March
we'll
20th,
make the
2021.
We'll make the cake in like a month, and then we'll just put it in a cave somewhere until your birthday.
Happy
And
birthday,
make me
buddy.
find it, a stale cake
Yeah.
in rural Virginia. That's fine.
What do you got for us?
Well, we're going to take a little shift over to the Western Theater here in 1864, which I feel like it maybe isn't as lighthearted as what's happening at the Point of Rocks, with the exception of those two casualties. So we're going to talk a little bit about the occurrence at Spring Hill, Tennessee, which if anybody is familiar with Spring Hill, Tennessee, it sits about 20-30 miles south of Nashville. So the Battle of Spring Hill occurs during the Franklin-Nashville campaign. And honestly, in my opinion, what happens at Spring Hill is kind of decisive, even though it's not a huge action during this campaign. It kind of decides what's going to happen with the rest of the campaign, and really decides the careers of a lot of people after the fact. So in the fall of 1864, you have Hood's Confederate Army of Tennessee, who had just left the Atlanta region. Previous to Hood, you had Joseph Johnston commanding the Army of Tennessee, and he keeps falling back through the defenses of Atlanta. And Jefferson Davis decides that he needs someone who is going to be a little bit more aggressive. And John Bell Hood, with his track record, is the guy for him. Judging by his battlefield wounds, he has to be strapped to his horse every morning, pretty much. He has a missing leg and a bum arm. So
can I just say, you've always had a vaguely John Bell Hood kind of look to me. So like,
I've been getting that since 2012.
Is he missing a leg? Is there like a?
I mean,
Yeah.
minus the missing limbs and like the laudanum addiction. You.
Yeah.
I mean, just sub the laudanum with beer, and obviously we don't have the same kind of views, but yeah, I've been getting that since I worked on Franklin Battlefield. People always told me it was like the sad eyes, and I used to have a longer beard.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't very nice, but
You've got a better work record than John Bell Hood did.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you have Hood taking command of the Army of Tennessee in the fall of 1864, and he comes up with a whole new plan. Instead of attacking Atlanta or trying to keep Atlanta, Hood sets his eyes on Nashville, Tennessee. In 1864, Nashville, Tennessee is a major railroad hub. It had been in federal hands since 1862, since Ulysses S. Grant had captured Forts Donelson and Henry, a little bit west of Nashville. And Hood, at that point, sees an opportunity. The federal army is focused most of its resources around Atlanta. You have William Tecumseh Sherman eventually is going to be starting to move away from Atlanta. In the fall, he's going to start his march to the sea towards Savannah. And Hood sees basically a wide open path to Nashville, with nothing interrupting his movement toward Nashville. So Hood's going to start moving north. He goes through northern Alabama into southern Tennessee. George Thomas, who is commanding federal troops in Nashville, hears that Hood is heading north toward Nashville, and he doesn't really have much to hold him off with. So they're going to start kind of piecemealing together forces in Middle Tennessee. They're going to have the 23rd and 4th Corps, 4th Corps under David Stanley, 23rd under John Schofield. Fun fact about Schofield, he's actually going to nominate himself for a Medal of Honor post-war for actions at Wilson's Creek.
That's pretty bold.
It's very bold. I'll drink to that.
That's having your cake and eating it too, if you can do that.
Oh, cake puns. All right.
So Hood's going to start moving north through Middle Tennessee, setting his eyes, as I said, on Nashville. And you have federal troops arriving in the area of Columbia, which is a little bit south of Spring Hill. And as Hood is arriving in this area, you have federal troops kind of basically their job at this point is to hold Hood off until more federal forces can arrive in Nashville to fortify the city and fend off Hood's forces. So it's basically a race for Nashville at this point. Fast forward to November 29th, 1864, you have about 300 federal troops in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and you have federal troops leaving Columbia, Tennessee, and Hood, his intention is to cut them off at Spring Hill. So he's going to send his Ben Cheatham's corps to Spring Hill, leading with Patrick Claiborne's division. I'm sure most people have heard of him before. And Claiborne's division is going to spar with some of these federal troops in Spring Hill, as well as Nathan Bedford Forrest's Confederate cavalry, which is about 6,000 troopers. So the Federals in Spring Hill are outnumbered. Things aren't looking very good for them. And the Confederates start to arrive late in the day on November 29th. And as they arrive up there, as actually John Bell Hood starts to arrive in the field, he's going to order Ben Cheatham to block the Franklin Turnpike, which is the main road that, leads from Columbia to Spring Hill to Franklin and Nashville. It just goes straight up through Middle Tennessee. And Cheatham doesn't do it. And he passes the duty off to A.P. Stewart, one of Hood's other corps commanders. He doesn't do it. They pass it off to Nathan Bedford Forrest. He is low on ammunition. He doesn't do it. And so the blame just kind of keeps getting passed down. And keep in mind, these guys had been marching at least 20 miles a day. They're hoofing it through Middle Tennessee. They're very poorly equipped. Their clothes are literally falling off. They don't have any winter gear or anything. So what's going to happen is, as it's getting darker, and keep in mind this is late November, the sun starts going down at 4:30. So these guys are exhausted. They start to bed down for the night, and they end up camping on either side of the Franklin Turnpike. They leave the road wide open. You have this federal army of about 20,000 men and 800 wagons that are south of Spring Hill. They see this road wide open, and they're going to take advantage of it. Now, a lot of people think that John Schofield, who was kind of like the overall commander of the 4th and 23rd Corps, they think he made the move. I personally think it was David Stanley. He had more guff, I think, than Schofield did. And they're going to he's going to command the army to just basically move up through Confederate lines. And so, I mentioned this is a huge blunder. You're going to have, starting at 11 p.m., about 20,000 Union troops, as well as 800 Union wagons moving up through Confederate lines at Spring Hill and heading toward Franklin, Tennessee. And now, so this is why
it's like straight through.
Yeah.
Like these guys.
I actually have a really cool account. There's the regimental chaplain for the 49th Tennessee Infantry, a guy named Chaplain James McNeely. He was also the regimental historian. And he recorded afterward, he said, Cheatham's corps had marched ahead of us, and the two corps were in bivouac along the turnpike near Spring Hill, with the Yankee army surrounded. And yet the road was left open with not even a regiment thrown across it. The federal commander at once began his retreat, and for hours their army was rushing past us in considerable confusion. Several times their private soldiers fell out of line and came to our bivouac fires to light their pipes, thinking the fires were their own men's bivouacs. Of course, they didn't get back to their own men. The next morning, Wednesday the 30th, the scene along the road indicated the haste of the federal retreat. Wagons overturned, cannons and caissons dismantled, muskets and cartridge boxes and canteens thrown away, knapsacks and haversacks discarded. It was plain that the federal general had escaped with his whole army and in very good condition, and all because someone had blundered. So that kind of gives you an idea. There's other counts just like that one where federal troops are just falling out of line and walking up to Confederate campfires, and still nobody really says anything. And then, the next day, the 30th, the Confederate Army is basically spanked at Franklin, and they're going to take, 7,500 casualties because the Federal Army had time to entrench themselves south of the city. 2 weeks later, they're just, the nail in the coffin is at Nashville. And then, Hood's going to resign about a month later. So that's why I say Spring Hill is kind of like the most pivotal point of the Nashville campaign, even though there's not a whole lot of, casualties that are exchanged there. And then probably one of the most, I would say one of the lesser known engagements during the late 1864 campaign as well. But if you ever get a chance to check it out, there is still parts of Spring Hill that are preserved minimally, but there is some stuff still there. And I believe we used to have a documentary that we played at the Battle of Franklin Trust that kind of talks about this quite a bit too.
Awesome.
The blame gets passed around. I mean, decades after the Civil War is over, these guys are still writing back and forth and blaming each other. Yeah, no, you didn't block the road. You didn't block the road, and it's published in a couple different newspapers moving forward. And John Bell Hood wrote about it extensively in his memoirs.
Ultimate grain of salt take with anything John Bell Hood wrote in those memoirs.
Yeah.
So, those things are crazy if you read those.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, it sounds like for Hood though, I don't know if this was the last nail in the coffin or if it was the icing on the cake.
Oh. Oh my God.
Hey.
Oh, Anne-Marie.
Everybody got one in.
I got a sympathy drink.
I think we've all been in those situations, like at work and stuff, where it's like, wait, I thought you were going to take care of that. Like,
yeah.
No, I thought you were.
No, you got that right.
20,000 men just walked out.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty.
I like to think like all during that night, you could feel the breeze coming off the road, right? As these soldiers are just like hoofing it.
Well, you're going to be hearing the wagons and everything. Like, there's
You talk about dismantled wagons, guys dropping muskets and things like that. You're not hearing any of this. And then, if you look at the years after the war, for example, if you're familiar with Wiley Sword, I think he was a Hood biographer and he studied the Army of Tennessee quite a bit. He actually blamed it on, his suspicion was that Hood was so doped up on laudanum that he had no idea what was going on. Now, there's no real evidence to support that. And I think a few years ago, one of Hood's descendants actually came out with a book. They found medical papers, I think, in New England from Hood's doctor that basically proved that Hood was no longer on drugs by the time the Nashville campaign rolls around in late 1864. So it was just, pure blunder. There was no drugs involved.
Yeah, certainly a controversial figure. There's in the Civil War, there's a lot of examples of guys who I think were kind of promoted beyond their ability. Hood as a divisional commander is, one of the most well-regarded divisional commanders in the Army of Northern Virginia, but you put him in charge of an army. It's kind of like Burnside, when you stick him in charge of the Army of the Potomac, it's like blunder after blunder.
Yeah.
I think people have a ceiling.
And to chime in on that, I mean, we mentioned the arm and leg comments. I mean, he loses limbs during the war, and it reminds me of someone like Richard Jewell, who's a fantastic division commander. The guy loses a leg, and he is never the same after that. I mean, he gets promoted to corps command after Jackson's death. So, I mean, I don't know what he would like with two legs, but with one, it's not very good. And he just loses such an instinct. And I mean, I know there actually have been studies about how that does affect you mentally. But if I'm not wrong, he resigns and then is he doing nothing? And then he is replacing Joe Johnston in Atlanta's defenses. Is that what his is?
Hood
he replaces Joe Johnson in Atlanta and still obviously doesn't, help that situation at all. Is that? And
correct? Then and Hood after in January of 65, after all is said and done, and after they move back through Tennessee into Alabama toward Tupelo, Mississippi, he tries to seek a new command. He wants to be put out in the Trans-Mississippi Department. And really, by the time all is said and done and he finds a place in the Army in a new department, the war is over. And Hood surrenders. I think he surrendered in late April. But yeah, like I said, even that really, Franklin, Spring Hill, Nashville kind of defined Hood's career. That was like the capstone for his career in the Civil War. And you see people after the fact, even some veterans shooting blame at Hood for, in their words, massacring their men at Franklin.
I was gonna ask about that. Like, I'm not a Civil War scholar, but I've heard historians make the claim that, like, Franklin is almost Hood punishing his army, or kind of throwing his army at the federal troops as a way of kind of proving a point, or maybe like trying to
and I think Wiley Sword might have been one of the historians that kind of perpetuated that story, that Hood was on laudanum. Hood is punishing his troops for letting the federal army pass through their lines, and there's no evidence to actually support that. It's more of an assumption. If you look at Hood as a commander, historically he's very aggressive. Which Hood's sending about 20,000 men across 2 miles of open ground towards well-entrenched Federals at Franklin. It's going to be a bloodbath. But he basically saw it as kind of a last-ditch effort. That if he weren't able to defeat the Federal Army at Franklin, and the Federal Army makes it to Nashville, then for lack of a better word, he's screwed. He's not going to, he does it anyway. He still goes to Nashville. And he lasts, he basically camps south of the city for 2 weeks. And then, December 15th and 16th, the Federal Army comes out of their trenches, attacks Hood's army, and they just crumple. So it was more of a desperate act, I think.
Is that where Patrick Claiborne dies?
Yeah, he gets killed at Franklin. Him and 5 other Confederate commanders are killed or mortally wounded there.
Yeah, and then Nashville is, I think, one of the more understudied, underrated battles of the war. Thomas just absolutely obliterates the army there.
Yeah, I think it's also because not much of the battlefield's left. I lived in Nashville for 6 or 7 years. There's only a few key sites that you can actually visit still from the battle. Most of it's been developed, and for anybody that's familiar with Nashville, it's one of the fastest growing cities in America right now. So not much left to see, unfortunately. But if you're familiar with John Banks, John, I believe, has something to do with the Nashville Battlefield Trust down there. And he's been doing really good work with, kind of going out and photographing some of these sites and promoting what you still can see of Nashville Battlefield.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I would try to lighten the mood with like the Overland campaign, but there's 85,000 casualties.
Yeah, that's kind of a bummer.
We just go back to cake stories.
My story has mostly a happy ending, so we can.
Sorry, I brought the mood down a little bit with that one.
Yeah, we drink out of sadness with that one.
Yeah.
So my story, and I'll keep it pretty brief, so we'll have some time for more questions and discussion. My story is about Henson Willis, but I want to start from the perspective of a different resident of the Heritage area, and that's Ida Delaney, who lives at Oakley, which is near Upperville, Virginia, kind of south and east of Upperville, just a little bit. And she is a great example of someone, a resident of the area, who is caught between forces that she, can do very little about, no matter what she feels about it. She's a secessionist. Her husband Hal fights with the 6th Virginia Cavalry for a while before leaving for an injury to one of his legs. It's pretty significant. But she is there at Oakley. They have an enslaved community, and in the fall of 1864, they're kind of between a rock and a hard place. So after Early's shenanigans up near DC, Sheridan chases him, right, chases him across the valley, and then Sheridan ends up taking up residence in Winchester to the west. Meanwhile, in the east, by fall of 64, we have Christopher Auger, Major General Auger, who's taking over the Washington Department, and he is trying to rebuild the Manassas Gap Railroad, which is going to run right across the southern, the southern area of Ida Delaney's property there. And not only are these two powers on either side, but right where she is are, of course, Mosby's Rangers, the 43rd. And their job in all of this is to create as much trouble on either side as possible. So during the summer and fall of 1864, Mosby is sending raids west to Winchester, east towards Fairfax, trying to screw things up as much as he can for them, which is all well and dandy for Mosby, except that it means that we're going to have Blazer scouts from the Winchester side, and then the 8th Illinois and other units from the eastern side, am I getting those directions right, west and then east, who are going to be then coming back to get retribution on the Rangers. So all of the residents, whether you are folks like the Duttons in Waterford, or whether you are the Edmonds in Salem, now Marshall, or if you're the Delaneys near Upperville, you're just there, right, for a lot of this. And depending on what day it is and what Mosby just did, you're either going to have a contingent of Confederates, riding by, or you're going to have a contingent of United States troops riding by, or taking your horses, or raiding your cows and taking your bacon and taking your boots if they find them. Just whatever it is basically up for grabs, whatever you might have in your home. And towards the end of October, there at Oakley, things get a little hairier than usual. On about the 25th or 26th of October, in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, Ida says, they hear a knock at the door. Usually Ida's husband hides elsewhere in their property on a little mountain, little hilltop they have there. But because there had just been a raiding party through before, Ida thought that Hal would be safe sleeping in the house. It was like, just stay in the house, take a night off, from being a fugitive, and of course it's that night at 2 o'clock in the morning that we have Union officers come knocking at the door asking for Hal. He manages to hide. They manage, Ida, she doesn't lie. She's a Christian lady. She will not lie, but she manages to tell enough half-truths that the Union officers eventually leave, taking one of their very last riding horses with them. Not 2 days later, a fight breaks out in her yard between Mosby's Rangers and the 8th Illinois. The 8th Illinois had been down for some other kind of business, and the Rangers saw them, and under Walter Franklin, set up a very misguided kind of trap for them, in which one detachment of Mosby's Rangers ended up penned in between a fence and a ditch. So while only a couple of Mosby's Rangers perished in this, Mosby was livid that Franklin had gotten them into such a badly planned fight. Why would you do that? So the Illinoisans obviously came out on top in that skirmish. Ida Delaney witnesses the death of 2 of these Rangers in her own house. She said there's blood pooled all over the foyer, and only a few Illinoisans are actually injured. But the Illinoisans, during all the chaos, they decide to load up all of their wounded on Ida Delaney's ox cart. So they just commandeer her oxen and her cart, and they ride it away with the injured parties. Ida manages to lay the mortally wounded soldiers, the Mosby's Rangers, to rest. And then the next day, she marches out to go reclaim her ox cart and her oxen. She is insistent that with the household as large as it is, and that includes her children with Hal, and also the number of enslaved peoples that she has there on the property, that they need the ox cart to haul firewood to sustain the family. So that's her mentality. She's going to go get this ox cart. She's not going to take no for an answer. And so she heads on down to where the camp is. She first stays over at Kinloch, where her family is from, and then goes to the encampment, which is near Salem, kind of between Salem and the Plains. And when she gets there, she meets one of the captains who had been there when they went knocking on her door several nights before, trying to arrest her husband. And this captain, Slosser, he says, we're not going to give you your oxen back. We know where they are, but we're not going to give them to you. And she's not having this. And so she does one thing we're all familiar with. I'm going to speak to your manager.
Speak
right?
to your manager.
Who can I talk to? And it just so happens that Major General Augur is there. And so she goes right to the general, and she does the whole thing about like, my family needs the firewood and the ox cart and the whole, like, I'm not saying that she didn't mean it and that it's not honest, but she's able to pitch, she's able to give her pitch, and Augur relents. And he says, you know what, Schlosser, go take, sorry, my cat's being weird. Go take this woman to the encampment in Salem where the oxen and the cart is, give her stuff back, and escort her, basically, make sure she's safe doing that. And so Ida Delaney is feeling pretty good, right? She just went directly to a general, and he listened to her and let her do what it was that she wanted to do. So she's feeling pretty good. She's feeling a little high and mighty. She goes to Salem. She reclaims her oxen. She's got her cart, and she turns to leave out of town. And who does she see but General Augur and a man that she knows at least a little bit, a free Black man named Henson Willis. So Henson Willis, along with Augur, they're there together, are stopping her from leaving. Well, it turns out that Henson Willis, his wife Lucinda, is enslaved in Ida Delaney's house. She is her property. And Henson has possibly not, we can't confirm this. Ida definitely thought so. Henson may have been supplying information to Augur, to the 8th Illinois, about like when Hal might be at home, or what were the movements of the Confederates, things like that. And in exchange, Henson is now going to come home with Ida to collect his family, and they're going to leave. They're going to go to somewhere else where they can be free. Henson, for the last at least 10 years, has lived in the same stone house near Clifton. It's really just a crossroads near Clifton, near the houses that we know of as Crednell and Catesby, up on the northern side of Upperville. So Route 50, up here is where Henson Willis would live, and then down here is where Ida Delaney lived. It's very, very, very specific. And so Henson had been living in his own house. He was renting it for several years. He had one wife who worked at Oatlands before she passed away in childbirth, and then he had married, become attached to Lucinda, working there at Oakley. And they had a few children by this point in 1864. They would eventually have 5 to round out the family. And at this point, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation has been issued. Technically, the enslaved peoples are free. However, that is absolutely not the case for every household that's, south of the Mason-Dixon.
Unless you can enforce it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we do have some United States officers who are willing to enforce it, especially willing to enforce it when it's obvious that those enslaved peoples, they want to leave. They want to be able to seize on their freedom, but they need help, or they need authority to do so. And so Henson, whatever it was that he was able to barter for Augur's muscle, for his representation, I can't imagine what kind of a sight that was for Ida Delaney to think that she just pulled one, on Augur, and then Augur shows up with Henson Willis. So Henson demands surety from Ida that he will be able to go home and collect his family and return to the Union camp unmolested. And Ida keeps demurring, right? She's not going to lie, but she says, well, technically, I don't own Lucinda. Technically, Hal does, my husband does, so I can't promise anything, kind of a thing. And Augur says to Ida, if he and his family are not here by sundown, I will hold you personally responsible. So Augur's not having it. Henson and Ida go back to Oakley, Ida's livid at this point because she feels like all of her authority has been undermined. Lucinda pretends like, oh no, I didn't want this to happen, but it's clear that she had already packed her things, right? Like she was already ready to go. So they're able to leave. But within a few hours, Ida Delaney's next journal entry writes that they had been arrested, that Henson Willis had been arrested before he could even get back to the Union camp. And that's only like a few miles away. Salem is one of the closest places you could get to from Oakley.
Arrested by who?
Arrested by Confederates. I should be
Okay.
more specific. Yes. I don't know which Confederates or who, or a detachment, if it was Rangers, if it was civilians, I don't know. What we do know is that according to Ida, Henson got sent to Libby Prison in Richmond for some time, for several months. I don't know what happened to Lucinda and the children during that time. But what we do know is that shortly after the Civil War, the whole family were living together again in Henson's house near Clifton. And so after the Civil War, they built a school there at the crossroads. There were many more formerly enslaved people that were living at the crossroads, that were building homes, that were building a community. And it's there towards the turn of the century that it became known as Willisville. So it's a really interesting little community story, because Willisville was recently added to the National Register of Historic Places, and it's Loudoun County's only historically Black community to be on the register. And there's also a foundation there too, and it's named for Henson Willis and his family. His grave site is still there. He's buried with his son, who's also named Henson. His wife, after his death, moved to New York City to live with a daughter. But there are still a lot of folks in this area that can claim relationship or kinship to the Willis family, and that's a little bit of their story.
And that's a bold move, showing up with a major general in the United States Army being like, give me my family or else.
Yeah, and when Henson doesn't show up, Augur arrests Ida Delaney for a short time. She is actually detained.
So he calls her bluff.
He calls her bluff. He doesn't. He threatened to ship her off to Washington D.C. for imprisonment, but instead she's confined in like the plains for a little while. It's no big deal, but it scared her. It scared her pretty good. But there was no evidence that she had anything to do with Henson's arrest, as far as I can tell. So I assume that's why there was more leniency and less jailing.
Wow. Apropos of nothing, Christopher Augur had some of the greatest sideburns in American military history. Like, they're stupid.
How do they compare to Burnside?
I would say more spectacular.
Oh yeah, so Burnside was very full and nice, but Augur's had distance.
They're like wings. Ridiculous.
Were they like the eagle?
They may have been eagle-like.
Well, that was awesome.
Yeah, like I said, it's not a terribly long story. There's more I think that can be found about this. It's a story that you kind of have to read between different accounts to figure out. You know, Mosby's Rangers, a lot of their histories, of course, they talk about the fight at Oakley. Ida Delaney talks about the raids, you know, in the middle of the night coming to her house. But a lot of folks forget that whether they were enslaved, whether they were free, you know, there were other people living in the communities seeing what was going on. They had their own motives, they had goals, they had things that they wanted, and they had the bravery and the determination, you know, to try and make those things happen.
Yeah.
One thing I'm wondering, I mean, obviously we cover local stories to us in Northern Virginia, and we've covered issues, you know, from 1862 with eroding slavery and various emancipations and, you know, blockades. Rach, when you were experiencing in Tennessee, like, what is the experience for civilians in that area that you study? I was kind of wondering about a comparison between what we've talked about so often and maybe what you saw when you were working around Nashville.
Well, so, you know, working in Franklin in particular, a lot of what I learned in that area, living in that area, and a lot of the stories that I heard from, local people, stories that have been passed down really, because a lot of those people who especially live in Franklin and kind of that part of Middle Tennessee have never left. A lot of them kind of stuck around. A lot of them aren't fans of Yankees. And I just, they're super nice to me, and
Because your sad eyes.
Yeah.
it was
John.
You look a lot like Hood. I like you. But no, everyone was super, super nice to me. But you could tell that, generations back, there was some resentment toward, federal troops in the area. For example, in Franklin and Williamson County in particular, you hear about headboards from federal soldiers being used as firewood in wintertime and not even batting an eye at it. You hear about some of the atrocities that occur, especially in 1864, as federal troops are kind of passing through there. Some of those atrocities might be embellished upon. But the civilian experience in that area, a lot of there are a lot of Confederate sympathizers, obviously, and there still are. I haven't been back in a very long time. It's been a couple of years actually since I've been back in Middle Tennessee, but that was kind of my experience when I was there. Was generally there was a lot of support for the Army of Tennessee, and a lot of these people are directly related to the guys who were fighting on Franklin battlefield or Nashville. Those families are still there. You see, there's actually during the Middle Tennessee campaign, as things are starting to wind down a bit. Obviously, these guys didn't know that the war was going to be over in a few months, but you see a lot of guys are starting to desert as they're moving into and out of Middle Tennessee in December of 1864. Honestly, I think one of the most popular private soldiers in the Army of Tennessee in late 1864 is Samuel Watkins. A lot of people have read his book Company H. Ken Burns uses that as a reference for his documentary. There's a lot of people that think that Sam Watkins himself might have even deserted sometime during the Middle Tennessee campaign, if that gives you some idea.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because I had ancestors from East Tennessee, Carter County, Tennessee, which is famously Unionists, and they served in federal regiments raised in East Tennessee. And all the stories I heard were the Confederate Home Guard came to our house and stole everything and harassed us and turned us out.
That's the crazy thing about Tennessee is it was split into, as I've always heard it from other people, it was the three states of Tennessee. You had East Tennessee, which was mostly pro-unionist. Middle Tennessee was kind of cut down the middle, but probably leaning more toward Confederate sympathies. And you get into West Tennessee, and it's pretty much purely Confederate sympathies out that way. And so, in East Tennessee, toward the North Carolina border, you see a lot of, in these mountain towns, you see families at each other's throats. It's actually pretty ugly. Even
bushwhacking and retribution. Yeah.
I usually mention Loudoun is not unique, but it is unusual, right? The situation. Loudoun's not the only one that has a divided county. It's not even divided equally in Loudoun, but in Eastern Tennessee, there's parts in Georgia, Alabama, Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee. There's a lot of pockets of resistance within the Confederacy that start crumbling from within.
And especially over time, as it's clear that the toll of war has not made anybody's life easier, and it makes a lot of these folks more entrenched, even though they're all suffering, as you pointed out too, Joe, that everyone is suffering from the different policies and the different armies that are marching through, but that doesn't mean that they're not still divided.
Yeah, and it is tough for everyone. 1864 is such a critical year. The dam starts to break, really. You think of the Confederacy, where you've got Grant putting on pressure everywhere, whether it be from Louisiana, Tennessee, Butler coming from the Chesapeake area, then overland campaign. The dam is breaking. People are experiencing the war in areas that they haven't firsthand experienced, at least in terms of armies, ever before, and armies are living off the land that you see, and it's
Yes. Well, I also feel, and you can say this at any point in the war, really, but in the fall of 1864, things get really nasty and personal, especially here in Northern Virginia too, with the Great Burning Raid,
Yeah.
which
yeah.
which the Northerners claim, Sheridan would claim is merited and is not like a breach of wartime policy, but which the Southerners thought was absolutely bananas and ridiculously cruel. But it just seems as though until this point, there's been a one-upsmanship of, chipping away at what standard procedure is, chipping away at do we protect civilians? Do we take their stuff? Do we pay them for it? Do we, and by 64, let's burn it down.
Yeah. It actually reminds me a lot, harkening back to our last History on Tap, where we were talking about the Revolutionary War, because we absolutely see a similar thing, in that conflict. You have, how do we treat these people? Do we want to win hearts and minds, or do we want to win the war?
Yes.
Do we want to crush their ability to make war? So like the Burning Raid, they come in, they don't burn houses, but they burn mills, they burn barns, they take horses, they take cattle.
Yes, they burn fields full of crops.
Right.
And it's too late to grow anything else. It's a starvation campaign.
Great point. And burning things of Unionists, where they're not differentiating secession and Unionists. This is the big picture kind of thing. But what happens are like the Duttons and Steers, like they suffered 1864. They're Unionists. They fall victim to the broader war effort where they're trying to win the war.
I mean,
again, you can't differentiate.
Mosby's Rangers don't care if the cattle they're using come from Confederate sympathizing families or from Unionists. They don't care. So why should the Federals? Yeah.
And in fact, the Dutton sisters too, they actually read about this, that when the Burning Raid comes, they sit on their fence posts and they lean out the windows and they shout, burn away, if it will keep Mosby's men from coming back. So like they get it. They understand how bitter it is and their own sacrifice too.
Yeah, of all the years of the American Civil War, 1864 really is horrific in a lot of ways, both on the battlefield and off the battlefield. I mean, it's a whole different war.
It's especially as we come to the very, very close of 64, after the Burning Raid, and frankly, the election of Lincoln too, there's just this like, feeling in the South of like, what do we do now? And I think the writing is on the wall, and I think people are seeing that, and they just have to doggedly get through this horrible winter that they know is ahead.
Right. I mean, because I'm not a Civil War guy, but really the re-election of Lincoln in 64 is what seals the deal. And that, going back to Early's raid on Washington, or, the fighting outside of Atlanta, the fighting outside of Petersburg, if any one of those theaters doesn't give, there's a chance Lincoln's not reelected. But of course, you have the fall of Atlanta, you have Sheridan's Valley campaign, you have, at least in the North, some semblance that like we're going to see this thing through. I don't know. I might be way off base here.
Not bad for a guy who's not a Civil War guy.
I'm not a Civil War guy.
Hey, if you want to talk 1781, we'll talk 1781.
Oh my God.
I would say definitely late 1864, especially, is year of the scorched earth when it comes to Union policy, and as ugly as it is effective ultimately in kind of putting an end to the war. Between Sherman and Sheridan, their methodology of warfare is very effective. And honestly, like if you read just accounts of the average fighting man, for example, at Franklin or Nashville or any of those places, you read a lot of these guys' accounts, and they're very forward and blunt about what they're seeing and doing on the battlefield. And I feel like their demeanor changes a little bit between 1861 and that point in time. They're a lot more graphic when it comes to describing the hand-to-hand combat, for example, that happens around the Carter House on Franklin battlefield. Really graphic stuff that you might not see in letters or journals earlier on, say in 1861. And I just noticed from, pouring through hours of journals and letters from different guys who were on the front line in the trenches. And this kind of mentality was shared across the board. These guys at this point are becoming, I don't want to say numb, but definitely
disillusioned. Yeah.
Yeah.
Disillusioned, disenchanted. It's no longer about valor and honor anymore.
Yeah, it's survival at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I don't know, you can't speak for particular ones, but not only is it moving from civilian to hardened soldier, but you're also going from volunteer to conscript.
Mm.
That's got to probably change the writing, where you get guys who don't even want to be there to begin with that get stuck being conscripted into the army, and they're in this brutal war. And like for Virginia, at least, I mean, look at the battles of 1862 and 1864. I always show 1862 is brutal, but it's broken up over longer periods of time. Where in 1864, you condense violent conflict in a matter of 5 weeks of 85,000 casualties, really.
Mm-hmm.
And of new soldiers, but not all veterans. Like
Sure.
in the Army, the New York Heavy Artillery is involved in Cold Harbor. These people, they're in the defenses of Washington, and now they're, in horrific fighting. I killed the conversation.
Thanks for bringing it down.
That's what we get for we want to do like a comedy show about a terrible war.
Yes. How about that eagle cake, guys? Right.
So that eagle cake.
Thing that came out of 1864, a 25-foot long eagle cake.
25-foot eagle cake.
And
That's
sassy
a good
jokes.
name for an
by
album.
Flavor.
25-foot eagle cake.
Yeah, I don't know that 1865 is going to be much better.
At least there's an end to it.
Good news, everybody.
Yeah,
After
that
this,
was
there
the
will not be
60s.
any more.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, so we are going to be, doing this over Zoom for the rest of June, and we've got some planned for July as well. We're also, hopefully by next week, we can announce an in-person one that we're planning for July. That should be official by next week, Thursday. We can announce. We're definitely looking forward to getting this in person. Hopefully, we can even live stream those as well, potentially.
Safe and socially distanced, but
Exactly.
still in person.
We are also going to be taking a break for the 2nd of July. So I know you guys have been carving out your Thursday nights for us. You have that Thursday night to get everything done that you've been putting off every other Thursday night.
Start baking that cake.
Bake that cake. Hashtag save the bird.
Rich, do you have anything work-wise, Civil War Pittsburgh-wise you want to plug or mention? Or I know obviously everyone should follow. You got Instagram and Facebook. Follow Civil War Pittsburgh. You guys have awesome content that you post every day there.
Thank you. Yeah, I am still posting pretty regularly to Civil War Pittsburgh, as well as I'm one of the contributors to the Pennsylvania and the Civil War blog with you guys know Jake Wynn, Cody Aish, and Kendrick Gibbs. So I'm doing that regularly, but also, as we mentioned earlier, I'm in South Carolina right now. There's a reason for that. I'm working actually at Reconstruction Era National Historical Park as well. So if anybody gets a chance, maybe after this pandemic clears up, hopefully it does sometime soon, take a trip to the Low Country and stop by and say hello.
Eat some seafood.
Eat some seafood. Visit Rich.
Yeah.
What do you
That
have
sounds ideal right now.
Yeah.
What's going on, Mosby?
We have a live at 5 tomorrow at 5 p.m. We'll be talking to Lee Lawrence, wonderful friend of us personally, as well as the Mosby Heritage Area Association. She's done a tremendous amount of research and transcription into Civil War era diaries from this area. So she will be discussing the diary of, she's doing the Cochrane diary,
Mary Catherine Nolan Cochrane.
I just say Catherine Cochrane because I can't.
It's a lot of names.
Yeah, it's like Mary Catherine Powell Nolan Cochrane's diary.
Nolan. Yeah.
She was a woman who lived in Middleburg, Virginia during the Civil War, keeps an extensive diary that covers everything from guerrilla warfare to treating wounded soldiers to self-emancipation of enslaved people. So it should be a really good discussion, and that'll be at 5 p.m. tomorrow on the Mosby Heritage Area Facebook.
And on Sunday on our Facebook page, you can see Travis talk about the history of the W&OD walking trail.
Yeah, we're going to be talking railroad history on Sunday. So trains.
What's going on with Loudoun Museum?
We're going to go to our weekly blog. We're posting tomorrow. We got one coming up about Juneteenth tomorrow. And then next week, Friday, we're targeting reopening. So when you want to come get the Waterford news, again, shout out to Waterford Foundation for the work they've done to preserving those. We've got copies in the museum. And yeah, our plan is to reopen next Friday.
My last plug, I think I said it, but I want to say it again. If you're interested in Willisville, the Willisville Preservation Foundation does have a website that you can find out more about the early residents of Willisville, some of the architecture, and you can also go visit the town too. It's a neat little crossroads village.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening, and hopefully we'll see you again next Thursday.
Yes.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, thanks, Rich.